Regardless of how it was perceived then and now, the Texas Western Kentucky game did mark a turning point in college basketball recruiting.
After that 1966 game, that's when the SEC schools, all of them, really, everybody went after black players. That's when even universities became more desegregated. That's when change really took place.
In 1965, Rupp and his staff became interested in a player from Nashville. His name was Perry Wallace. In '66, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt all made recruiting pitches to the all-star forward.
Obviously, everybody knew how great UK was and as a basketball powerhouse. But what happened was that Coach Rupp was conspicuously absent. In addition, information flowed through the black grapevine about Wes Unseld and Butch Beard, people who had been recruited by the University of Kentucky. And the word was that Coach Rupp was not active in recruiting them and was not really willing to talk to the parents to at least say that he's willing to, stand behind their son in Mississippi and Alabama in the Deep South.
Of course, Rupp had made personal overtures to Unseld and Beard, routine for many recruiters, uncharacteristic for the Baron of basketball.
I think he felt that everything being equal, if a youngster had an opportunity to come and play at the University of Kentucky, you didn't really have to beg them. You just offered them the opportunity, and they would consider that an invitation to be a part of the greatest program in the United States at that time.
Recruiting was certainly not the highly scientific, seduction that it is today. Either you wanted to play for Adolph Rupp or you didn't. He wasn't going to sweet talk you into it.
Following UK's loss to Texas Western in the '66 NCAA championship game, it had become clear to most that the future of any successful college program included African-American athletes. Some basketball fans in the South, including Kentucky, were slow to embrace the change.
The resistance was there. The resistance was there with the displaying of the Confederate flag and with the playing of Dixie and even in terms of the lyrics of My Old Kentucky Home. All of that, was a determination on the part of whites to hold on to the old way. We can't change. We're fighting for a cause that our ancestors fought for years ago, and we're not going to surrender. And at the same time, you've got African Americans say, "Oh, yes, you will surrender. Yes, you will change. We demand change. You'll change or else. You'll change here at the University of Kentucky, or else you will no longer win any other NCAA championships. You'll change, or you'll even start losing in the SEC, because change is coming. This train is moving, whether or not you're willing to get on."
Perry Wallace had decided he would become the first to break the color barrier in the SEC, and it bothered him that Rupp did not make more of a personal pitch.
I wondered, how could I be ready to go place my life on the line when there was someone who was, not willing to make personal contact with me.
After sitting out his first season, as all freshmen did at the time, Wallace began what would become an all-conference career. Playing basketball in the Deep South was every bit as daunting as he thought it would be, and more.
The Mississippi and Alabama schools were always the harshest ones. And I mean, just outright, people just unleashed it. And there was nothing to hold them back. So much so that people back home listening to the game on the radio heard all the catcalls. Oh, they threatened your life. They threatened to lynch you, particularly because they knew that would, in the Southern culture, threatening a black person with lynching or castrating you, the whole deal. And we're going to kill you, and on and on and on.
There wasn't much enthusiasm on the other side for people to be the first African American, for one young man to be the first African American at Kentucky, and that's why Perry Wallace, I love Perry Wallace because he took that challenge at Vanderbilt, and every black player that has ever played in the SEC ought to write Perry Wallace a letter and say thank you for what you had to go through so that I was able to play in the SEC.
A strong student with supportive parents, Wallace also was a Sunday school teacher, and he found it ironic that he embraced the same Christian faith endorsed by many of the bigots hurling threats and insults.
I was the enemy, although they didn't know me personally and didn't know much of anything about me. But the great irony was that just what they had used to be strong in life and to be good in the ways that they were good were just the same things, precisely the same things.
Wallace says there was one place where basketball transcended matters of race, Lexington, Kentucky.
See, the quality of the play was so important. Those were just great. I mean, we were in the zone. I didn't even know the phrase in those days. They didn't have the phrase, I guess, but we were in the zone. You had great basketball, and you had people like Dan Issel and Mike Pratt, and so the quality of the game was so good, and I think that really just lifted everybody to a wholly different level.
Coach Rupp really liked this guy, and Perry Wallace caused me some real issues with Coach Rupp because Coach Rupp didn't like the way I guarded Perry or the success we had. We won the games, but he was always on me about doing something with Perry Wallace. Can't you guard him? And so later on, I played with Perry Wallace in an all-star game and saw him afterwards, and I joked about that and joked with him about it. I said, man, you caused me some problems as a Coach Rupp's on my butt,
Ironically, Rupp eventually did coach Perry Wallace in an all-star game once Wallace's college career had ended.
He's very, very nice. He offered to be helpful as he could in regard to the draft, and speaking to scouts and that kind of thing. And that was striking.
Perry Wallace was named All-SEC as a senior. He went on to a successful law career and now teaches at American University in Washington, D.C. Rupp, meanwhile, resumed his search for the player he thought would be the right man to take the same step as Wallace, although his absentee recruiting methods were proving to be more of a hindrance in a time of social change.
With all that was on TV and in the newspaper, to be so disconnected, that's the tragedy, to be so disconnected from that, knowing that it exists, but perhaps in a state of denial that, one was not willing to look beyond their ego and their willingness and determination to win and say, hey, we've got a bigger problem here.
It was as if Rupp could make it happen. Maybe Rupp could have made it happen. But Rupp was a man born in Kansas in the 19th century. He came to Kentucky in 1930. His world was not Martin Luther King's world. He was not a social crusader. He was a basketball coach. I think it was too much to expect, too much to put on his shoulders to think that he should have been a social crusader in addition to being a basketball coach. Very few people have done both those.
It would be 3 more years before the University of Kentucky would sign a black basketball player. The years ticked by in the late 60s, and still there were no black basketball players on the Kentucky roster. Rupp had made overtures to a number of homegrown talents, including Felix Thruston, Jim McDaniels, and Hazard's Jim Rose, who, by some accounts, including Rupp's, verbally committed to the Wildcats.
The mayor of Hazard went down there and got him, brought him into my office. He sat in here and agreed to come to the University of Kentucky. The mayor was the happiest man that you have ever seen. The next morning, the mayor called me and was beside himself. The boy had signed to go to Western Kentucky. Now tell me that I didn't make an effort to get these boys? We did. We made every effort that we could.
I do recall his comments to the assistant coaches and saying, why can't we recruit these guys? Why is it that we can't convince them that if they came here they'd be good basketball players, they could fit in and have a great career? I think he was frustrated simply because in his own mind he's wondering, well, why would they not come play for me? And of course he thought that about every player, that any player in high school would want to play for him.
In fact, late in his career, Rupp complained openly about the evolution of the recruitment of athletes, both black and white.
No wonder they're spoiled. They get to them in high school already. Put them up on a pedestal. And you have to go, a head coach of a team has to go and beg a kid to come to school. If that isn't a hell of an arrangement, beg a kid to take a $10,000 scholarship.
Meanwhile, African Americans on the UK campus demanded answers. Rupp, football coach Charlie Bradshaw, and athletics director Bernie Shively attended a public forum to discuss recruiting. UK President Dr. John Oswald kept pressing Rupp, demanding that he sign a black player. Again, Rupp balked.
He says, you're keeping us and probably jeopardizing us from getting all this federal help, which amounts to some $11 million. He says, we'll get someone. I don't care if he sits on the bench. I says, I'm not going to do that. I said, I'm not going to get someone, have him sit on the bench. I said, I don't recruit that way. When I recruit, I'm going to get someone that can play. And the only way I'm going to offer anybody a scholarship is if they can play.
And Dr. Oswald insisted that he have a black player, no matter if he could play or not. And that irked Rupp quite a bit.
One of the major changes taking place was how, African Americans wanted to define themselves. What do they want to be called? From colored to Negro to black. And so by the mid-1960s, it's black power. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. And we don't want to be referred to as coloreds anymore or Negroes. But in interviews and, from time to time, Coach Rupp would use the term colored or Negro. And this was seen as another form of resistance to the changes that were taking place.
Rupp's chief recruiter, Joe B. Hall, kept running into a different kind of resistance.
There was a concerted effort by several of the assistant coaches that I worked against to keep black players from coming to Kentucky. I mean, even black assistants for other colleges worked against us from getting black players. And I told one of them, I said, I can't imagine you not wanting to help us integrate our program, you being a black assistant.
But in 1969, the University of Kentucky finally signed its first African-American basketball player, Tom Paine, a 7-foot prep star from Louisville.
He was a tremendous prospect, just absolute 7 foot, 300 pound. I swear he must have a 30-inch waist.
I mean, he could shoot outside. He could take you out like Issel did and shoot the 15, 18-foot shot. He could take you inside, and he was just a sophomore.
Of course, Tom, he thought that Adolph could do more to advance his pro career. That was his motivation.
Paine was an Army brat. He spent part of his childhood in Europe, so he knew little of the controversy swirling in the Deep South.
My mother and my father were not racist, and they never gave me any kind of racial perspective. And living on the Army base, I lived on Army bases most of my life, where whites and blacks intermingled, and so I never really got racism, in my background. I never heard nigger and all that little stuff. Now that may be idyllic, but it's true.
Paine couldn't practice with the Wildcats as a freshman because of academic troubles, but by the time he was a sophomore, he was fully eligible and ready to begin playing for Adolph Rupp.
What I remember about Coach Rupp is I think I knew in my heart that he would play the best player at the time. And that's what I really worked for.
No amount of work, both on or off the court, could have prepared Paine for the abuse he was about to endure from opposing fans.
I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't. And, spit at him, throw things at him. I never will forget Knoxville. I was really crushed up there. I heard the coons and the other things that I was called. I heard the heckles and stuff like that. Knoxville really surprised me because, we'd come out of the dressing room and he had to come right by the Tennessee crowd, and they were just unmerciful on him, just, using the N-word and cussing him and everything. And I'd question whether I'd want to, if I'd been black to play, go down south. They were throwing ice and they were spitting out of the stands, and they were quite vocal. I can't remember anything in particular because they like to focus on my father as well as Tom, but it was pretty bad. I mean, it was rough. My wife and I were right there at the entrance when the team was coming off, and we were starting to step out, and there was such a barrage of things being thrown that we had to step back in, and the kids were coming out with, as I say, Coke dripping off them and things like that. It was pretty bad. Well, I remember one place where they just shook his fist at the crowd. They were razzing him so bad, police down south.
And we went down to play Louisiana State, and it was terrible the way they hollered and screamed and yelled at Tom Paine. And Coach Rupp was infuriated.
We bonded that game because they were unmerciful on him. You know, they spit on us coming out the tunnel.
That's what I've been